This video, we will talk about comparing the key features. We have already discussed that IELTS asks us to summarize writing task 1, and to do that effectively, we had to select the key features, support the key features, and compare the key features. We have already learned and hopefully mastered selecting the key features and supporting the key features. In this video, we will start comparing the key features. Alright, let's first try to make it as transparent and as simple as possible when it comes to comparing. So what does it mean to compare? Let me get it here. Alright, so when comparing, the basic translation here is сравнить, yoki, solshtarish. It sounds already simple and already basic, but still a lot of people struggle to understand exactly what am I supposed to compare. Do I just compare the highest and the lowest and that's it? Well, here we have exact things that we should be comparing. The first, most important principle is that your comparisons must make sense. There must be some logic behind your comparisons. And you should be comparing something almost everyone or generally everyone would compare as soon as they look at the graph. So make sure you're not just comparing for the sake of comparing and you're just comparing the highest and the lowest, but comparisons you make actually make sense. All right. I know this sounds a bit overgeneralized and still quite vague, and you can misunderstand this. To make it more clear, I will show you what do I exactly mean by making sense. So when you compare, make sure you compare the general similarities. Again, the keyword here is general. You shouldn't be really looking for details. When searching for general similarities, always look at the key features you already selected, not at the graph. Don't focus on small things. Again, general, big similarities. Then general differences. And especially in trend graphs, the extent of change. When I say extent, I mean stepping, derecesi, o'zgarishi derecesi. How rapid it was. Maybe the change of one category was much more noticeable than the change of another category, or it was sharper, or it was more pronounced, right? So compare the extent, stepping, yoki darajasini of change here. Plus, one more thing we gotta focus is on surpassing and outnumbering in general, right? Don't really focus on 1 year or 2 years. Focus on general surpassing and general outnumbering. When one category had more numbers than another category. All right. The rough translation here would be qachon qaysi kategoriya boshqa kategoriyadan oshib ketdi. Когда одна категория начала опережать другую категорию. Именно опережение. I try to focus on them as well when comparing. Only if they are very noticeable. So all of this should be very noticeable, and you shouldn't be putting too much effort to looking closely and trying to get everything right. It should be very apparent and very noticeable. Alright, fellas, let's go ahead. We're working with this graph. I already have my key features. This was our first step, and you should already also have your own key features. And our comparisons will directly depend on the key features we selected. We will be working directly with every single key feature. Alright, fellas, first, before we start, you gotta understand the graph. You gotta understand exactly what am I comparing. Am I comparing the years here? Hmm. I don't really think so. We're comparing, basically the number of closed shops, and we're comparing the number of open shops. That's it. Basically, we're comparing two things, closures and openings. Make this absolutely clear. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and we'll start from our first comparison, our first general comparison. Let's take a look at our key features. So we're saying that first, closed shops fluctuated between these numbers, quite high numbers. Whereas in case of open shops, we're seeing a huge decrease here, very noticeable decrease. Here, the difference is only, here, the difference is only in 1,000. Here, the difference is in 5,000. And we're talking only about 2012. Whereas here, we're talking about 3-year period. That's interesting. Then we have a partial recovery and then huge increase, like 2,000 increase to 6,000. Whereas here, it is still 1,000. When I say 3 years, I'm still talking about 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013. Yeah. All right, fellas, so basically what is happening? Let's have a visual here, how it looks visually. So I have this key feature of closures, and I have this key features of openings. So what do I do here? So basically, I guess generally I'm going to compare these categories in the period between 2011. What is this? All right, 2011 and 2014. That's it. Because there's no way for me to compare this circle, this green circle of openings with this big circle of closures. All right, so I have to generalize this. Okay, right now you can pause the video and try to compare closures with openings between the years 2011 and 2014. Right now, I'm going to put my first comparison sentence. All right, so basically what I have here, so what's the difference actually? I think the difference here is, let me remove this so we can see it a little more clearly. In the extent of change, if you look at openings, the changes are very noticeable. They're very sharp. Whereas when it comes to closures, the difference is only in 1,000. All right, let me write a sentence here. So I will say that the changes in the number of openings between the period let me just make it shorter, 2011 and 2014 were much more sharper, so much more sharper than the changes in the number of closures uh, during the same period. All right, right now you may want to pause the video and try to understand the structure of this sentence. I'll break it down myself as well. So I have my subject, the changes in the number of openings between 2011 and 2014 was what? My comparison here is here, was much sharper than what? The changes, uh, I put here, I misspelled it, I'm sorry. All right, the changes in the number of closures. And I added Torsto here between 2011 and 2014 here during the same period. I'm done with the period until 2014. Now I need what happened next after 2014. So let me first get visual proof and then I'll work with my key features. Okay, so here after 2014, any similarities? If you see, closures also dropped and openings dropped. The drop here was very noticeable. It's sharp, whereas here, it is not that pronounced. All right, my second comparison here then is that, put it here. All right, both dropped in 2014, but the drop, not drop, let's say the fall experienced by what? By closures was, and I want to show that the difference was big. So I say far, far more pronounced, far more noticeable. All right, that's it. I'm done. All right, let's go with the third comparison. Again, you may want to pause the video and see what also can be compared here. All right, so we talked about this. How about this? Can I compare this with this? It doesn't really look okay, right? So It's not really relevant, it's quite confusing. Um, you will waste time trying to compare that. Okay, let's see. Let's look at our key features. Here, it remained relatively stable. So I have stability here, and I also have stability here. Maintained, relatively stable. So this is my first comparison, third comparison, that both of them were stable towards the end of the period. So I say toward. Toward means приближаясь к концу, охрigi кияны. Towards the end of the period, both the number, so it's a similarity here, the number of open shops and closed shops remained relatively stable. But there's a little difference here that I cannot ignore, which is this. In the end, there's this little drop here, which I already mentioned here in my key features, that it dropped by 1,000. So I have to mention it here as well. I cannot ignore this. Toward the end of the period, both the number of open shops and closed shops remained relatively stable. Though, it means حتى, lekin, there was a slight drop uh, in the figure for, I'm going to use a different vocabulary here, make sure you understand this, for the former. So when I say former, this translates as первый, бренче. So бренче дьянамда, when I say первый, I'm talking about the first category. Let me just highlight this. So former, I'll have red, and I have two categories. I have open shops, I have closed shops. Open shops is the first category. So former, when I say former, I'm talking about this. All right, now I'm done with my general comparisons. Let's see. Did I do what I asked myself to do? So yeah, they make sense. They're understandable. Everybody will understand when they read this. All right, I talked about similarities, that they both drop, they both remain stable. I talked about differences, that somewhere there was a more sharper change, the drop was more pronounced. About this, I also talked sharper change. However, I didn't talk about surpassing and outnumbering, and I shouldn't miss this. All right, let's see. Now, for every, I will be adding this outnumbering and surpassing. So during the period between 2011 and 2014, there were more closures than openings. Let me put here. Uh, over this period, over this period, there were, I say generally, because I gotta be careful. You see, in the first year, there were more openings, and that's why I will say generally, because it wasn't always the case. Over this period, there were generally more closed shops than opened ones. Done. How about this? About dropping during 2014. So only during 2014 there were more openings. All right. Only during this period, there were briefly, when I say briefly, for a short time, there were briefly more openings than closures. All right, and I have my last comparison here. Should I mention that there were more closures? Yes, I should. And I'll say, uh, within this period, within this period, um, I'll say that closures regained their lead. All right, I'll say regained, so they returned, like their position. They, closures, regained, regained the lead. All right, that's it. Now I'm fully done. I've compared everything I could compare, everything that was general, everything the examiner could think of. So there's nothing left here to compare generally. All right, in the same topic, you'll find quiz questions where you can practice selecting comparisons and producing comparisons that actually make sense.